Basically, the shutter speed, the f-stop, and also the ISO work hand in hand.
When we buy cameras, and by we, I mean beginner content creators. If you're a beginner on YouTube, you're doing your vlogs, you're doing your sit-down videos. A lot of times we tend to shoot our videos in auto. I'm very guilty of that. Very, very guilty. It's just very easy when it comes to you shooting in auto. I have the Sony ZV1F and I've done a couple of videos on that camera, but I really wanted to bring you guys a video about actually shooting in manual mode, and I have someone who's gonna join me and actually speak on that because he's more of a professional, and that someone is actually my husband. He's a professional photographer, so when it comes to him breaking down what, you know, all these terms mean, he's going to be the best person to do that. I know a lot of us are very scared of like the tech jargons that they have, and we just tend to stick to what we know, but sometimes it's okay for you to step out of your comfort zone and learn other things. So don't be scared of it, embrace it. Okay, if you're someone who wants to know how to get your videos to be super professional, then stay tuned, and I'm about to ask really good questions. Okay guys, we're here. Here's my professional, okay?
Hi.
The reason why my videos look nice and crispy is thanks to this guy. I have always been an auto girl. That's just me and him. We, you know, we've had some arguments where I'm like, just leave me alone, just let me set the camera to whatever I want to set it to, and he's like, no.
I think you just like the easy way out, which is cool. Easy way out is cool, but sometimes you gotta take it to the next level.
And I think a lot of you guys out there also, like, you know, you tend to just like shoot your videos in auto and that's it, because you don't want to have to deal with you always having to change your settings, which he's gonna tell you guys what these settings are, and I'm gonna be asking him questions that I feel like people want to know the answer to.
All right.
Okay, so the first question I'm gonna ask you is numero uno.
Okay.
Is what is the difference between someone shooting in manual mode and someone shooting a video in auto?
I think for me that's like basically manual. I mean, auto is like you having the training wheels on a bike, right?
Damn. Okay.
And then auto is where you take off the training wheels and you're now in control of balancing your own weight controls and all that. So what I mean is when we shoot on like auto, we're letting the camera decide for us what we want basically.
Yeah.
Now that's great for like if you just want to grab and go, but however, if you want to be more creative, then you have to take off those training wheels and really be willing to play around with the things that we're going to talk about today.
Damn, so you're saying I'm a child? That's the reason why I like
No,
auto?
I mean, it's okay. You know, auto works in most situations, but sometimes there are situations where you want to be in control of things, and that's when you let the camera know, hey, I am actually the boss here, so I'm going to take over now. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. We're starting off strong. Okay, so the next question that I have is, you have some technical terms, right? When it comes to you shooting in manual mode. What is shutter speed and how does it work?
So your shutter speed basically when it comes to camera is how fast the curtain in front of your camera opens and closes. Now what does that mean out there? So for example, your camera in here, the Sony a6400 that we have set up, I have your shutter speed at 1/60th of a second. The reason why I have it at that level is because your frame rate per second is set at 30 frames per second, so we never want to go below that. What that shutter speed means basically is how fast your curtain in front of that lens goes up and down, and that allows lights to hit that. Now the thing about shutter speed also is the lower that number, right, the more light that you're going to let in. The higher that number, it means you're going to close that curtain real quick. It's like me taking something and literally clapping my hands and opening that. That's what that
so
shutter
basically
speed is.
like the lights we have in here right now, it's like you taking like a dark cloth and putting the cloth over the light, and then it becomes a little bit dark.
Look at it more as you closing and opening a window.
A window, okay.
That's what the shutter speed is. Like how fast that curtain, that window goes up, that's what that shutter speed is.
So you usually tell me to either put the shutter speed at 160 or 180. Why not like 100 or 150 or 140? Why is it always between like 60 or 80?
That's a great question, right? So when it comes to shutter speed, guys, it really depends on what environment you're shooting in. For example, if you're outside and it's super bright, you're not always going to shoot at 160 or 180.
Oh, okay.
Right? You can increase that shutter speed. The thing with operating in manual is you got to play with those numbers, right?
Okay.
If it's too bright outside, let me say I go outside and I'm I'm trying to take a picture, of course I'm not going to be shooting at 1/60th of a second. So for example, if I'm shooting little kids, things that are action, I want to be able to freeze that action, right? So I'm not going to be able to shoot at 1/60th of a second. If I do, my image is actually going to be blurry. In your case here, your camera is mounted on a tripod. You're fine, it's not shaking, it's not moving. In my case, if I have on my telephoto lens and I'm shooting pictures and I'm shooting things like people dancing, I always want to be like, make sure I'm shooting at a higher shutter speed. So I'm basically like, ideally I would probably shoot at 500th of a second because I want to freeze that action. So shutter speed really is not like there's a template for it.
Okay.
It's just that depending on the environment that you're in, and in this case we're in a controlled environment where the light is set up, and also your frame rate per second is 30 frames per second. So which is why I usually tell you, hey, in a controlled environment, don't go below 60. Now you can go above 60 depending on what the light and the environment is.
Okay. Question number 3. What is aperture and why is this so important?
Okay, so look at your aperture. Let me first say this, right? You might hear people say the f-stop. Aperture is referred to the f-stop, right? And look at the aperture as the opening of something, right? Okay. And that something is your lens. So for example, the Sony ZV1F that we're talking about here, the f-stop on the Sony ZV1F, the lowest number that it goes to is 2.0, which is actually very, very good because the wider that f-stop, which in this case is f2.0, I'll probably say the circle is wide, it means there's more lights coming in. Okay. Now what that does also is it blurs out the background. That way you stand out. It separate you from the background, right? Which is why, for example, if you have an iPhone, you shoot in portrait mode, right? It actually separate you from that background. What Apple is doing there is Apple is using different camera settings. That's why most of the phones that do that actually have 3 lenses. That's what the f-stop is. So everything that we do, right, is f related. Okay. Right? So that f-stop is how big or how small your circle is. The bigger that circle, right, the more light you're bringing in. Okay. So for example, when I shoot a group of people, let me say I'm shooting a wedding and I have a large group, I'm not going to shoot at f2.8 because I know not everyone is going to be in focus. So what I do is I usually crank it up to like f8 or f16. Now what that does is at that rate is actually making the lens smaller, right? The lens opening smaller. Okay. But however, now it's going to make sure that people or whatever object in the background is not blurry. Everything is in focus. So if you want things to be like more out of focus where whatever you're recording stands out, then you want to shoot at the lowest f-stop, which is in this case the Sony ZV1F is f2 2.0. 2.0.
Okay, yeah. So I have a question because a lot of people use that camera to vlog, right? So if someone wants to shoot videos in manual using the Sony ZV1F, if you're vlogging, for example, us, right? If we're doing like a family vlog, me, you, and the kids, so you basically don't recommend I have the aperture set to 2.0. So put that up a little bit.
In that case, so it really doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter?
In that case, it doesn't matter because ideally, right, you're going to be rotating that camera on different people as they talk. Okay. Right? Okay. So now can you crank it up? Yes, you can crank it up to maybe f4.0. But now when you crank it up though, the thing with the f-stop is as I crank up my f-stop, the less light that is coming into my lens. So if it was bright, now it's going to get darker. So the more you play with that number, the lower the f-stop, the more light. The higher the f-stop, the less light that is coming into your camera. So to put things into perspective here, we talked about f-stop and shutter speed. So for example, if my f-stop is at f11, now my shutter speed, I probably have to decrease my shutter speed. Okay. Right? That way I can at least, depending on the environment, of course, but it's all about playing with those numbers.
Okay. We're going to demonstrate it for you guys so you can better like understand it visually, but also, you know, this is good so you guys can get it.
Next question. I want to go. I don't like being in front of the camera.
He really doesn't.
I don't.
I'm telling you guys, for me to get this, guys, now I feel like people are going to ask for you to be on camera more so you can explain things even better.
Don't. I hate being in front of the camera.
But it's just not right for me to explain it because I don't know. But anyway, question number 4, I think. So you've talked about the aperture and shutter speed. What role does the ISO play in all of this?
Okay, so ISO basically is responsible for the amount of light coming in terms of how sensitive your sensor is, because cameras do have what we call sensors. There are crop sensors, there are full frame sensors. So the camera I have, for example, is the Canon 5D Mark III. It has a bigger sensor in comparison to, let me say, the Sony ZV1F that we're talking about
even
here.
this camera that we have, right? Okay.
Exactly. The Sony A6400 is a crop sensor camera, so it has some limitations to how high that ISO can go. Now the ISO is measured actually from like 100, and you can go up to, some cameras will go up to as high as 3200. Now the thing with ISO though, like for example in this environment, the Sony A6400 that we're recording with, I have it set to 250 ISO, 250 ISO. 250. And the reason being is now different settings. Let me say if we had a lens that's like a 2.0 on this camera, I'll actually drop down that ISO, because the ISO, guys, is responsible for the noise that you have. Most people might think, oh, let me crank up my ISO, more light comes in and all that, but then you stand a chance of like having grains in your images. So for example, if you go to a concert and it's dark out there and you take out your iPhone and you take videos and pictures, you might notice that actually your image is either dark or your video have grains, because the iPhone camera here doesn't have a bigger sensor enough to actually handle that environment. We call it noise. You see noise in your image or in your videos because of probably your ISO was very high in that environment. I know you've probably recorded a video with your iPhone where your kids were playing, but it was dark outside and you see grains. It was because of the ISO. The ISO was very high because the iPhone basically had to like automatically adjust the ISO for you. Right? So depending on how big your sensor is, you might crank up the ISO, but ideally if you're in a controlled environment, you want to shoot at the lowest ISO that you can shoot at to avoid any grains on your image. Okay,
my ISO is set to 250.
250. Now
you said if we had a different lens, you can crank that down to maybe what, 200
or probably 150, because I want to make sure that your videos have zero grains basically.
So it's also not just about the camera, but it also, if you have a camera that you can change, the Sony ZV1F, you can't change the lens. So, you know, but also there's going to be other people watching this that they have also, maybe they have the Sony, I think E10 or whatever it's called, and you can change the lens. So, you know, that's going to apply to them.
Yeah.
So if you have a, like, I guess a better lens.
Well, no. You can so remember though, the Sony ZV1F already have a f2.0, which is lower than the lens that we have on here.
Oh, okay.
The lens that we have on here, the lowest that lens goes is a 3.5.
Oh,
so there's a difference in the f-stop. So if the lens that we have here was like a 2.0, of course I will crank things down. Probably crank down the ISO, then I'll probably crank. It's all about playing the numbers game. Right? At the end of the day, there is no exact template to say this is the right thing. It's just you have to know what those numbers do, and then depending on your environment, you play with those numbers. So there's no template. Guys, there's not, like, I cannot sit here and tell you set your camera this way. It's all about you knowing that number, your ISO, your shutter speed, your aperture, and then playing with those numbers depending on what your environment is. Just know how to play with it.
Okay.
Any more questions?
I don't know. Let me see. Do I have any more questions? Okay. Yes, I do have another question. We did the ISO. Question number.
Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about the numbers. Just ask the questions. Next question
is, I know color can make or break a video, especially for beginners. How do you choose the right color for your video?
So let me say this. So color, basically, if you're recording in manual, the one thing I'll probably say still keep on auto, especially if you're a beginner content creator, is your white balance. It's called white balance. So most cameras have what we call auto white balance, which is AWB. Stick to that if you're new to it. I'll probably try to demonstrate it for people to see, like, with color, the more you show people, the more they will understand it. But if you're a beginner content creator, I'll probably say even if you're shooting in manual, stick to auto white balance, except if you feel comfortable playing those numbers.
He's about to demonstrate so you guys can get the visual part of, like, this whole thing he just said.
All right, guys, let me walk you guys through what we were talking about. Right now the camera is actually in intelligent auto. So the camera is deciding on like whatever we want. So you notice I cannot change things here pretty much. This actually changes based on the environment. So let me show you guys something here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off one of the lights. Pay attention to this number, which is your shutter speed. That is your f-stop, and this is your ISO. So I'm going to turn it off. As I continue to record, you see how it changes. Now it's at 125. So the camera is actually making changes for us. However, Sear is actually still dark. Now let me show you what manual does that intelligent auto doesn't just do for you guys. So the first thing that we're going to talk about definitely is the shutter speed, which was the first question that Sear did ask me. As you guys can see, is 1/60 right now, which like I said is measured in fraction. But you guys watch as I change that and what happens. First off, actually before I do that, the way you set the camera to manual mode is you go to menu. Right now it's on manual, but if most of you guys are probably on intelligent right now, you're shooting on intelligent auto, but I can go to M and just click enter. Now it's in manual mode. So step one, let's talk about the shutter speed. Shutter speed here is, as you can see, it's 1/60th of a second there. So as I rotate this down, watch what happens. Right now, if you click here, that is highlighted. It means I'm dealing with the shutter speed. So I'm gonna crank this up. As I crank it up, you guys notice here is very dark right now. Now, as I bring this down, now you start to see light. So that is how your shutter speed actually works, right? The lower that number, the more light you're letting into your lens. The higher that number is, the less light you're basically letting into the lens as that window goes up and down. So there we go. And back to this. All right, guys, so that's your shutter speed. The next step we're going to talk about is the f-stop, which is your aperture. And as you guys can see, it's set to the lowest, which is f2.0. That is the lowest the Sony that is the lowest the Sony ZV1F can go. So next, now let's talk about the f-stop. Okay, so I can click down, then now highlight it. Now notice what happens as I go up. Okay, same idea here. Sear is darker, right? And this goes up to f8.0. And as I go down, notice what happens. Now she's gradually coming back. And that is how the f-stop works. Just know that there is no particular template. It all depends on the environment and the light that you have available to you. But that's the f-stop. The next stop that we're going to talk about is the ISO. Before I even talk about the ISO, I'm actually going to crank this back to let me say 8, right? It's dark. Now here's what the ISO does. The ISO right now is set at 125, but even though Sear is dark right now because of these two numbers here, when I go into crank the ISO, just watch what happens. So I'm going to actually click here, and then I'm going to crank the ISO up, and you guys notice what happens. You see that? So even though those numbers are low, the shutter speed and the f-stop is low, as I crank up the ISO, you notice here now it's back in focus. But the thing that we're not seeing on display here is the little grains. And that's based on the fact that the ISO is very high. Right now it looks like this ISO is at 4000, which is very, very high. It might not look like, oh, it's high, but that's very, very high. And I know if we go into edit this video, we're going to see noise. So as I go down, you notice here, of course, it's darker. So basically the shutter speed, the f-stop, and also the ISO work hand in hand. So as I go down, right now I'm at ISO 125. I can go back and say, oh, this is actually very dark. It's not working for me. But check this out. I'm going to go back and say, I want to now decrease the f-stop. As I decrease the f-stop, Sear is back now, clear and in focus. The next thing I can say is, I actually don't like this. Maybe it's too bright or it's too dim. I can go in and say, okay, I want to play around again with my shutter speed now, right? So it's a matter of you playing with those numbers as long as you know what you're doing. All right, finally, the question that Sear asked me last was the color, the white balance, right? Right now, one thing I said is if you're new to the creation space, you're not comfortable with cameras yet, I would definitely recommend auto white balance. All right, so guys, to play with the white balance, now white balance is something that, of course, usually you want to set before you click record. So I'm going to go into function, then you see where it says AW be, that is auto white balance, which means I am letting the camera decide what the color of the environment or my skin tone or whatsoever.
Okay, so last thing, if I was setting up my camera right now to record a sit down video in this studio, where are you gonna set my ISO, my f-stop, my what is it, shutter speed, and my white balance?
So in this environment, if I were to do that, so let me actually pause this. Of course, go back here and change your, I'm gonna put your shutter speed back to 160. Okay, then the next thing, I'm gonna shoot at the lowest f-stop. The next thing I'll play with definitely is the ISO.
And you said the ISO will be maybe about like 100.
Depending on the environment. Right now, I'll probably say, looking at things here, I'll put it to 160 because that looks great. That is fine for you. So yeah, that should be.
And the white balance at auto white balance.
The white balance, yes, I would recommend auto white balance, but let's go back to what auto white balance looks like for you in this case. Yeah, the auto white balance actually is perfect. Like, I feel like it's showing your skin tone, it's matching everything. It's not like too warm, it's not too cool. So auto white balance is perfect. All right,
this was great. Yay, high five. And if you just want to take control, like he said, if you want to take the training wheels off your bike and you just want to have full control of your creativity, of your exposure, of every single thing when it comes to you vlogging or you just doing sit down videos, etc., etc., then I hope this video was very helpful to you. Leave me a comment in the comment section if you guys have any more questions. I'm gonna try to bring him back, okay? But thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel, turn on your post notifications. I post every single Sunday except otherwise because I'm a mom, stay-at-home mom of 2, so you know there's probably going to be a few Sundays where no videos, but every single Sunday you guys expect a video from me. Thank you so much for all the support. Love you guys. I'll see you guys in my next video.